Right, good afternoon, and thank you very much all for attending. Just some quick housekeeping, remind you that this is a meeting in public and not a public meeting. I also would like you to ensure that all your mobiles and other devices are switched off or on mute. And I would remind you where the exits are, particularly for the visitors who we welcome and thank very much for attending. The exits, if there's a problem, is that door you came in anyway, and you know where the front door is to get out. But there's another exit that way if that becomes necessary. Right. For those who don't know, I'm Brian Donnelly, Chairman of the Council. To my right is Councillor Tim Lloyd, who's the Vice Chairman of the Council. To my left, if I can introduce, because many of the officers don't know, we have a new legal officer, Louise Matthew, who's joined us and who has experience of council work, and she's come from Worthing. So welcome to Horsham District Council. Would the officers care to introduce themselves, please, to the public?
Emma Parks, the Head of Development and Building Control.
Hi, Jason Hawkes, Principal Planning Officer, Development Control.
Joseph Gapwell, Democratic Services Officer.
Thank you very much. Right. Item 1 is apologies. I do have note of apologies from Councillor Brown, Councillor Clark, Councillor Said, Councillor Dorr, Councillor van der Kloeg, and Councillor Wright had thought he might have a problem down south, but glad to see you here. We're very sorry to hear that you lost your barn in a fire. But it could have been really worse. Well done to neighbours and to the fire service for resolving it so well. We have the minutes of the previous meeting in front of you. May I sign these as a correct record? Thank you. Right, thank you very much. Item 3 is declarations of members' interest. Are there any declarations of members' interest? Councillor Wright.
Yes, I've previously used the services of Farm Access, which is, I believe, the applicant of agenda item 1, but years ago.
So it doesn't sound as though you'd have to excuse yourself. Yes, Councillor Porter.
Yes, just for the absence of doubt, I'm a member of the Institute of Acoustics, which may be relevant in item 6 on the agenda, but I don't believe it's prejudicial or pecuniary advantage.
Do the officers agree? They're happy with that? You're happy with that? Yes, the legal officers are happy with that. Are there no more declarations? There are no more declarations. Announcements. Do we have any announcements? In case you didn't hear, I've got a brand new baby granddaughter. So if my eyes look a bit. Right. Item 5 are appeals. You have those in front of you. I'm sure you've studied them carefully. Are there any matters anybody wishes to raise on the appeals? There are no matters that members wish to raise. Thank you. We'll therefore then move straight on to item 6, Cape Hall Farm Oakers Lane. Could I ask the first speaker from the public, please, to take a seat by the microphone? It's Ronald Deere. Be ready to go. And with the officers here to introduce.
Thank you. Good afternoon. So it's Copthall Farm, Oakhurst Lane, Billingshurst. I draw the members' attention to the addendum for this item, which was sent around yesterday. It outlines additional representation and also outlines an additional acoustic report commissioned by an objector and the applicant's response to that report and officers' comments. So this application was deferred from the committee in March for the submission of the noise assessments. Just to remind the members of the sites and the proposal. It received a location plan with the existing hard-standing Copthall Farm shown in red. This is the area for the proposed waste transfer site. The site is to the south of Oakhurst Lane in a countryside location to the north of Billingshurst. And I've indicated the listed building here, a Copthall, to the north of the hard-standing. So here's an aerial view, again with the hard-standing for the waste transfer south, as the site to the south of the farm in red. This shows that this is a rural location with a farm adjacent to other dwellings, adjacent to fields. So here we see the proposed layouts. Proposal is for use of the hard-standing adjacent to barn for the farm XS scheme. This is for a waste transfer site for plastic waste used by farming agricultural uses to be stored here and then sent on to be recycled. Baling will occur on site up to 8 days a year. The site is broken up to a 24 square metre area for baled storage and 150 square metre area for bag plastic storage up to 2.5 metre high. As stated in the committee report, a noise assessment has been undertaken and assessed as required by the deferral. The report goes into detail on the findings of the acoustic reports, and the council's environmental health officer has commented that based on the report, noise is unlikely to be significant in terms of the average noise levels. This also takes into account the additional acoustic reports received from the resident. In his view, the reports do not bring to light any major concerns. However, taking the noise assessments into account and the environmental comments, the officer's recommendation for refusal still stands. It is still considered that this is an inappropriate rural location for this use, and that scale and level of activity proposed would give rise to an adverse impact on the character of the countryside and the amenity of adjacent properties. This takes into account the relatively tranquil nature of this site in the area and the impact the proposal would have on this environment. This includes traffic movements, loading, unloading, and baling. It is not considered that these concerns can be adequately addressed by conditions. The scheme is therefore recommended for refusal as outlined in the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll go to the public and we have Mr. Ronald Deere ready to go. Mr. Deere, you have 2 minutes to speak.
Okay. Good afternoon. The applicant has been asked to demonstrate that there is sufficient need and why the location is appropriate and why they cannot operate their service from a less sensitive location. They have failed to demonstrate need. The Green Tractor Scheme has 5 farm recycling companies listed for this area, one of which is Farm XS. The other 4 operate a collection service. I also found 3 other recycling companies that provide a collection service, which is much more environmentally friendly than the service offered by Farm XS. Farm XS has not legally operated in this area for more than 2 years. Therefore, all farm plastic waste has been recycled using these operators. So there is no need for this application to be granted. Regard to location, Copthall Farm is situated 1 mile from the A29 and 2 miles from the A272. Both approaches are down a single track lane, blind bends and very few passing places. There are 8 public footpaths and 2 bridleways crisscrossing these lanes. Therefore, the increased traffic movement will endanger those using them. The location is on open countryside directly adjacent to 5 residential dwellings, cannot be deemed as a fitting location, which could be a potential fire risk. Your planning officer has twice refused this inappropriate planning application.
15 seconds.
The residents of Oakhurst Lane trust we can count on the committee to support the officer's recommendation to refuse this application. Thank you.
Well done. Right. We now have Mr. John Staines, who is objecting and will have 2 minutes to speak.
My name is John Staines, but I live in a house that's immediately opposite the proposal. at the proposed site. Since the last committee meeting for this plan, reference this planning application, a sound survey has been conducted by EAS for farm access. As immediate neighbours, we've had our own survey conducted by Stantec. And these reports totally, our report from Stantec is very contradictory compared to the EAS report. There's an application, I don't know any of the technical details, but having read the report myself, it should follow the guidelines of BS 4142 and be in compliance with the local planning authority. They've actually, the reference is from Stantec that it doesn't meet any of these conditions. This is a cause for alarm for ourselves. We've lived in Oakhurst Lane for 22 years. To live next door to a waste processing site is not a choice any person would make. And to have one put around our curtilage, well, there's 5 houses involved here, 5 residences, and we cover probably about 240 degrees of the circumference of the property. All of us can see what goes on. It truly is a nightmare scenario going through this. The anxiety this has caused the neighbours is quite considerable. We're not NIMBYs, and in previous planning applications, not one of us has ever objected to what Copthall has asked for, Copthall Farm. That includes 2 properties and various other schemes that they've done. 15 seconds. On that basis, we think we're being fair, but we do strongly object to this proposal. So I'm thanking you, from myself and our other neighbours, for your consideration to object this planning. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We now go to Mark Webb. If you'd like to get to the speaker who supports the application, you have 2 minutes, Mr. Webb.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon. I'm a director and co-owner of Farm Access. As a brief reminder, Farm Access takes used plastics, including silage film, fertiliser bags, baler twine and spray cans from towards 50 farms in this area. We bale the plastic through a lorry-mounted industrial waste baler and then send the bales for recycling. We appreciated the interest and support shown by a number of members at the meeting in March and recognition that our proposal fits neatly into the Council's recycling strategy. Since then, we have, as requested, supplied a noise report and answered a number of other points that have been raised. I believe we have provided everything and answered all of the questions that have been asked of us. We have offered a number of conditions, including baling being restricted to no more than 8 days a year, baling to happen only during normal weekday working hours, and traffic movements to be limited to 15 and 15 out each week. We run a low-key and extensive operation on towards 3 dozen sites across England. We go unnoticed by our neighbours in other areas. Indeed, we have never had a comment, let alone a complaint, arising from any other site. I therefore remain baffled by the level of concern about our proposed Copthall Farm. With no other farm plastic collection business running a site in West Sussex that farmers can deliver to, we hope that members will recognise this service is essential to the farming industry and that we offer an unintrusive solution and grant permission. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Webb. We now have Lisa Orton, who supports the application and will speak for 2 minutes.
Thank you. Afternoon, everyone. I'm a senior consultant with Environmental Assessment Services, a West Sussex-based consultancy which has undertaken noise assessment work for the past 27 years. I'm a qualified noise assessor with a certificate of competence in environmental noise measurement issued by the Institute of Acoustics. I also have more than 25 years experience in environmental health as a pollution officer. 17 years of those have been with Horsham District Council. I'm experienced in noise measurement and in the assessment of statutory noise nuisance. I've also acted as a statutory consultee on many occasions for Horsham's planning department in evaluating applications requiring noise expertise. We weren't particularly surprised by Stantec's review of our assessment, given that their brief was to provide a critique. Indeed, they do need to provide their client with value for money. But we were disappointed by its tone and that it was not particularly helpful to members in that it failed to acknowledge a fundamental point, and that is that the proposed activity would take place on a maximum of 8 days a year, only on weekdays and for a limited number of hours. The technical note provided by Stantec on the 9th of August, whilst criticising some minor technical aspects of our assessment, actually accepts our final calculations. But in coming to the conclusions in our assessment, we have had the distinct advantage of both being familiar with the site and the locality and having the benefit of seeing and, more importantly, hearing the baling process in operation. It's our professional opinion that there is no reason to refuse this application on grounds of noise disturbance based on the restricted hours of operation, conditions recommended by your Environmental Health Department. As an environmental consultancy, we also recognise the health and environmental damage caused when agricultural plastics end up burnt, flighted and landfilled, and the proposed operation provides a more sustainable method of dealing with these materials locally. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
We now have the last speaker, which is George King, if you'd like to go to the microphone. Mr. King is a supporter. Mr. King, you have 2 minutes.
Dear members, I am here to speak to you today on behalf of Neil Morris of Five Oaks Farm, Billinghurst, who has been a Farm Access member since 2012. His family farm over 500 acres in Billinghurst, comprising mainly beef and sheep enterprises with some cereal crops. Annually, they have several hundred kilos of fertilizer bags, silage film, baler twine and spray cans, all of which need to be disposed of properly. Mr. Morris states, as members will be aware, the countryside is where we, the farmers, operate and strive to upkeep the rural economy. Farming has never been an easy way of life, and the unpredictability of the climate changing means that I am unable to address you today, as I am currently frantically combining before the weather changes again. Given the pressures we farmers face, we are immensely thankful to the service Farm Access provides. It's effectively a go-to service for many farmers that would otherwise have the nightmare of having no local service to deal with the disposal of their non-hazardous waste. I understand that a few neighbours have expressed their objection to the proposal. While they have chosen to live in the countryside, this should not be at the expense of trying to stifle the rural economy. The Farm Access operations will only run a handful of days a year, and as detailed above, this is desperately needed to tackle the vast amounts of recycling required on my farm, let alone all the other farmers in the locality. If Coppet Hall Farm was a working farm, then there would be 365 days a year activity with no controls. Given the proposal is requesting 8 days a year, the operation will be barely noticeable in practice. Please, members, support your farmers and grant permission for this essential service. Yours faithfully, Neil Morris.
Thank you. Do officers wish to comment at this stage?
Yes, just clarifying, the eight days of year is the baling, so that is when the machine comes on and they bale the waste, but there will be operations throughout the year in terms of deliveries and storage. So just to clarify, it's not just activities for 8 days a year, there will be activities throughout the year in terms of traffic movements and storage. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you. We'll now go to the ward members. I'll call on Councillor Jump.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for members of the public coming to speak to us today. May I also thank the officers for re-looking at this application and providing additional advice to us in the light of the evidence that has been produced during the course of the last few months. I remain firmly of the opinion that this application should be rejected, and therefore I support the officers' recommendations for all the reasons that they have spelled out, both in their report and also Officer Hawkes has explained today. If I might just very quickly comment on a couple of points. In the addendum that we received yesterday, if I may, I will just quote 2 points that the officers made about the acoustic surveys. that shows that there is evidence of a negative change in the rural ambience and harm to it in character, as identified by your planning officers. It also goes on to say that your officers assess the suitability of this site for the intended use and do not consider it appropriate, nor do I. We've heard of other operations where the waste is collected from the farms and taken off to other locations. And this operation hasn't been running for a while now. It seems to me that there is no need for this operation to be located so close to a number of rural houses. And in my opinion, we should consider the situation if such an operation was started adjacent to houses, if we live, so we say, in the middle of Billingshurst, or if we live in the middle of Storrington, or if we're in the middle of West Chiltington. I can imagine the uproar that we would have from our residents. I find it very disappointing that some of the discussions last time that we met centred only on providing economy, or centering on the reason to bolster our economy. Also, can I just draw you to the comment in point 1.41 on page 21 of our papers today, at the middle of that paragraph. And officers remind us that this actually site would be acting as a waste transfer site. And in itself, it would not realise the benefits of processing nor recycling the waste itself. So may I say that the moral high ground of recycling is not achieved by this application. I therefore leave it to my colleagues to agree with me that this application should be rejected. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Jupp. I now call on Councillor Rowbottom, who is also Vice Chairman of the Council.
Thank you. Now, as an ex-farmer's wife, I didn't leave him, but we left the farm. I obviously sympathise that getting rid of the plastic waste is can be a real problem. But I do agree that this is the wrong place, I know we're not meant to talk about roads, but this is a small country lane, and as Officer Hawks has said, this is a go-to service. People are going to be delivering all day and every day, or on a regular basis, and that the road itself is just not suitable for that. And it'll come on tractors, trailers, etc., etc. The reversing and manoeuvring in the yard is going to be noisy, so it isn't just 8 days a year, as they're trying to say. And I do therefore recommend, confirm that I approve of their recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now open the debate up to the meeting. Councillor Circus.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I have to say I was puzzled by the comment officers made at the beginning in introducing this item. I think this is what was said. Taking a number of issues into consideration, including the noise issue, the recommendation to reject the application is maintained. But I can't see anything in terms of noise that would justify the view. Clearly the Environmental Health Department of this council does not think that that there is a noise issue that reinforces this recommendation. In fact, I don't think, Chairman, looking at the information in front of us, there's really very much that does support rejection. What do we see? We see in, for example, paragraphs 1.8 down to 1.11, the need for this facility is accepted. A lot of the complaint by local residents against this facility is that the need wasn't proven. Well, clearly, our officers accept that the need is demonstrated. Then in 1.15, we see that it is considered that there's no impact upon the significance of the listed building. In 1.16, we're told there's no highways issue. And So in 1.38, you see what the council's environmental health officer says, that there's not, as far as they are concerned, and obviously this is the second opportunity they've had to consider this issue. They do not think that there's a noise problem. And if there is a noise, if there is a potentially noise issue, it can be dealt with by condition, but they are not convinced. And to be honest, I respect their view. I think it's worth going back to the report we had in March, 6.60. It is important to recognise that the rural character of the district means that the wider rural economy is also important. This development would support the economics of land-based businesses to support the meeting of a rural community need. As a consequence, the proposal aligns with the part of the HDPF which supports sustainable rural economic growth in the district. These economic benefits weigh in favour of the proposal. You see, I hear what the residents say, but I'm sorry to say, Chairman, that if we listen to residents objecting, we wouldn't have any waste treatment plants in the country at all. The recycling industry wouldn't exist. We'd have no landfill sites, we'd have no incinerators, we'd have no waste transfer stations. The waste industry would not be able to function because there will always be arguments from people who don't want a waste facility in their neighbourhood. But I have to say, we are a council, and whether I should have declared an interest or not, as the cabinet member for the environment, I don't know. I will be told if I should have done, but at any rate, I'm declaring it now. We passed a motion in the first council meeting of this council in 2019 to say that we heard what the public was saying about the environment, and we were going to put the environment right at the centre of our decision making. And frankly, after what we've seen on our televisions and heard on our radios in the last week or so, well, frankly, we would be negligent as a public authority if we didn't put the environment right at the centre of our decision making. I think the report we have in front of us, Chairman, and the report we had in front of us back in March, I think makes the case very effectively for the approval of this application. We delayed this application because one or two members were concerned about the noise issue. Nothing in this delay has shown that the noise issue is a serious problem. The Environmental Health Department has looked at this again and they have confirmed their view. So we delayed to look at the noise issue, and the noise issue, our professional officers are saying it's not a problem. So I think the case is made very well in these papers for us to approve this application. I think we owe it to the rural economy, we owe it to the farming community, and we owe it to our commitment to the environment to approve this application this afternoon. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. I think if you look at the map and you see the cluster of those houses around the area, and you go to para 1.43 at the end part of page 22, where the officers say Coppet Hall Farm has particular sensitivities in its location, in its proximity to a cluster of residential receptors. I must say, I love that word. I've just learned it recently, thanks to this paper. its proximity to other receptors using the public right-of-way network, and its existing baseline noise as an equestrian business rather than intensive working farm. So that summed up a very important material consideration. But would officers care to respond to Councillor Circus, the cabinet member for?
Yes, certainly, yes. Makes some good points, and this is a balanced decision. As officers, we have to take into consideration all the consultees, and in this instance, the environmental health officer has recommended approval, but that is subject to conditions. And if you look at page 27, it states here, even though he's recommended a whole lot of conditions. So the first thing is, are those conditions enforceable? Will we be able to keep to those conditions? And there's a paragraph there which says he remains concerned with the prospect of any future intensification use above the level of waste activity proposed that could result in a detrimental impact. So if we do go with the environmental health officers, it would have to be heavily conditioned, and then there is a question about whether those conditions are enforceable. In our view, some of those conditions are not enforceable, and we have to take into account that the local plan puts a strong emphasis on the tranquility of the rural countryside. So that is a strong consideration. And the officer has gone into a lot of detail about the need. And yes, there is been identified a need, but that need is localized. And as you said, it's like a niche market. It's not recycling in itself as a waste transfer site. And that won't have any great impact on the waste local plan as such. But there is a need there, so that is a consideration. And so taking all that into account, we as officers feel that the detrimental impact this has had in terms of traffic movements, loading and unloading, as shown that there was an enforcement case last year when it was during COVID, so it was an intensification of use, and that led to complaints, which led to this application. That this can have a detrimental impact, but there is a possibility, if the councillors want to go with it, it will have to be heavily conditioned, and there is a risk there. And in our view, that's not appropriate to do so, and not enforceable.
Thank you. Are there any other members who wish to speak on this matter?
Sorry, as a farmer, I do feel like I should just throw in my 2 pennies worth. I also wasn't at the last meeting, so didn't get to hear the debate then. This is obviously a very difficult decision because both the local ward members and Councillor Circus are right. As in, there is obviously, and I know personally, there is a strong need for agricultural recycling properties. There are few and far between, and Councillor Circus is right. The reason why that is because most people don't want them right next to their property. So I have a huge amount of sympathy for all people here. There's strong demand for it. The officers are right as well. Is that if this was to go to heaven, it would have to be heavily conditioned. I will say though that as a farming business, there are more remote farmyards available than this one, and I would question why the applicant has chosen to, of all the farming premises they could have chosen to base business like this at, one that is near so many residential properties. So I will be begrudgingly voting this down, and I would encourage other members to do so, simply because of its location, not because of the business itself.
Councillor Wright mentions that if this were to be approved, it would have to be heavily conditioned. But could officers tell me, would it be easy to enforce conditions?
The officer's view is the conditions suggested by the environmental health officers would be difficult to enforce. Certainly some of them would be. And obviously that raises concerns in terms of our ability to control that, and adds weight to our recommendation for refusal. Thank you.
Thank you. Do any other members wish to speak? Yes.
Thank you, Chairman. I fully support the officers in their recommendation to refuse this application.
Any other members wish to speak? Councillor Craig.
Thank you, Chairman. As I started the noise hair running, I think probably ought to say a few words, mainly to thank our EHO for the work he's done. I spent a fair amount of yesterday looking through all the noise reports, and I think if I were to sum it up in a sentence, I'd agree with what's said in para 135. This is because it's still considered that the development would significantly increase the overall level of activity on site, and this intensity of use would result in a harmful effect on the locality's rural character and tranquility, the latter of course encompassing noise. So I'm minded to go with the officers on this one. Thank you.
Right. There are no more speakers. Oh, sorry, Councillor Law.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm probably going to be. Oh, sorry. Yes, I'm sorry. I'm going to probably be a little bit repetitive, but I've listened to the objectors and also to the supporters. And one of the supporters raised the issue about there being no complaints from other similar sites, but of course we have no way of, unfortunately, verifying that. And we have to take into consideration what is on the report before us at the moment. The applicant also, in my view, hasn't demonstrated a need for a service. Yes, there probably is a need, and the farmer amongst us, council writers, has mentioned that. But it is by the waste authorities' identification is a small one and localised. I'm mindful of what Councillor Circus said about the environment. It's absolutely right, of course. And we've also heard from the officers about the enforcing of the conditions and the potential escalation of the activities there and the harm that will cause. So, frankly, I feel that the refusal that originally had should stand on the basis that it's protecting the countryside against development of an inappropriate scale that leads to a significant increase in overall activity in the countryside. And therefore, I'm going to fully support the officer's recommendation. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Vice Chairman. Had a good debate. I think we should now go to the vote. I'll ask the Democratic Service Officer to call the vote, and the recommendation is to refuse the application for the reasons set out in this.
Sorry, Chairman. So the recommendation is to refuse planning permission for the following reason. The proposed development, by reason of its scale and location, would result in an intensity of activity, traffic and noise which would detract from the intrinsic character and ambience of its rural surroundings, as well as compromise the amenities of surrounding residential occupiers, contrary to policies 10, 24, 25, 26, 32 and 33 of the HDPF, which, amongst other things, seek to protect the countryside against development of an inappropriate scale that leads to a significant increase in the overall level of activity in the countryside. For these same reasons, it would also be contrary to waste local plan policies W11, W12 and W19.
All those in favour? Against? Abstentions? The motion is carried. Thank you very much. Does the Democratic officer wish to escort people out at the stage? If you could do so, we will take a slight pause. Do we have the speaker for the third person present? The third item? If he's outside, bring him in. weather's been very funny. hasn't it? Are you going to say something there before the vote? No, if it's refused, then we have to get propose a second floor to put a motion through to. If it's recommended for approval by the officers and the meeting wants to refuse, they then have to put a motion. Yeah, if the meeting agrees the officer's recommendation. Right, can we settle down again, please? Right, we're now going on to agenda item 7, which is the erection of a detached bungalow, Ashley House, roundabout Corps, West Chiltington. Would the officers care to lead?
Thank you. Members should know that we received 3 additional representations on this one support and 2 objections. There are some additional conditions I'd like to recommend as well. The standard broadband condition, standard condition for requiring details of cycle storage, and standard condition requiring details of refuse storage. So sorry about those omissions. So we see the location plan relates to eastern part of the garden of Ashley House within the built-up area of West Chiltington, fronting roundabout Copse. And here you see the photos of the existing house and the garden where the proposed house is to go. So permission is sought for a detached bungalow in the garden area. And you can see the proposed block plan. This block plan is actually the previous outline permission, which shows the plan indicatively. And this was granted for March 2020. And this is given considerable weight in the consideration of the determination of the current application for the floor plan application. And this takes account of the similarities between these two schemes. As said, here you see the block plan for the approved outline permission, which shows a bungalow in place with a shared access. You can compare that now with the current application for floor plan permission. You note that the bungalow is largely the same dimensions and the same position as the approved proposal I previously showed. And the main difference now is a separate access for the current scheme that is proposed to have its own access from roundabout close, as you can see here. So this plan shows the floor layout of the proposed bungalow. Then you compare that now with the floor plan of the approved outline permission, and you see it again, they're very similar. And this slide also shows the front and side elevations of the indicatively of the approved outline scheme. Then you compare that with the current proposal, and again, you see it's very similar. So overall, the current scheme is considered appropriate, taking into account the precedent of the extent permission, and the scheme is recommended approval in accordance with the conditions in the report and the 3 additional conditions I mentioned at the start. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There are no public speakers for this item. We'll therefore go on to the ward members. Before I call Councillor Circus, could I just ask him, Councillor Blackwell didn't make any apologies. Normally can't see him here, so I presume it's something. Anyway.
I was going to ring him this morning, but I was so busy I didn't get the chance.
Okay,
So
fine. Right,
I was expecting him here,
Yeah.
I have to say.
Okay. Well, Councillor Circus, would you like to speak on behalf of your ward?
Well, speaking on behalf of my ward, you will not be
And council.
surprised that my ward doesn't like what they see here. Now there's a surprise for you. No, seriously, I don't think this is in any way sympathetic to the neighbouring properties in the area. It's been squeezed in relatively small patch, built pretty close up to the boundary with the neighbouring property. However, to coin a phrase, we are where we are. And the principle of this development has been agreed and accepted. However, talking to residents, residents are very unhappy. They accept that what is decided is decided. What they're unhappy about is the access. They think that the moving of the access has resulted in a new location for the access, which they think is unsuitable, which is dangerous, is on a narrow, unsuitable part of the plot. Now, I wonder whether, Chairman, it would be a good idea if the officers are willing, is we could delegate this with a view to approval, because the principle of development has been created for the officers in association with ward members to look at issues such as access, to try and resolve residents' concern wherever possible. I don't know, I'm prepared to put that forward as a proposition. I would hope officers would accept that, because it would be, it's a way of demonstrating to residents that they're being listened to. It's in favour of demonstrating to residents that they're listened to. Yeah. Can I ask the officers through you?
Yes, we'll ask.
Chairman,
I think-
if
I think,
so, we could.
Yeah, I think you made the point that
Yeah.
That there is a previous permission in place, which, as we all know, sort of really does cast the die. But I'll ask the officers if they wish to comment on your suggestion.
If members felt that the proposed access is unacceptable, or the previous access is a better arrangement, then we can delegate approval subject to further consideration of the access. I don't think the deferral reason should be to try and address the concerns of local residents, although I appreciate that's the concerns that are raised, because essentially we must consider it on its planning merits, and whether their concerns are planning merits or not is something for us to consider. But if members were concerned about the proposed access, then we can certainly delegate approval subject to further discussions with county highways and perhaps with the applicant to see whether there are alternatives. So that is an option open to members if you consider that's important in the decision-making process. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm
Lloyd.
I'd like to just ask the local member a question. From the photograph there, looks to me not to be a very busy road. Does it go anywhere? Is it a dead end, or is it a proper thoroughfare?
It's not a particularly busy road.
Speaker.
I'm so sorry, Jim. It's not a particularly busy road, but it is. Nevertheless, if you have an awkward access arrangement, it still can be dangerous. I mean, I have to say, thinking of my access out onto a single track road, not a lot of traffic, but if you don't watch what you're doing, I tell you, a car nearly collided with me the other day. So, you know, the danger is there, even though it's not a high usage highway.
Do any other members wish to speak on this matter? Yes, Councillor John.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, I should declare that I'm a West Sussex County Councillor. I do notice that the West Sussex County Highways Department says it does not consider that this proposal will have an unacceptable impact on the highway safety or result in severe cumulative impacts on the operation of the highway network. I think there are only 13 houses that front on to roundabout Copse, is that right, if I look at the plans? Are we not saying that we're going to listen to residents to be held up to ridicule when we have petitions to this council with regard to other developments, when we have a few people wanting to talk about an access to one house, one bungalow. I do think this should be granted planning consent forthwith.
Any other members wish to speak? Councillor Chowan, followed by.
Thank you, John. Yeah, just looking at it at Google Earth, I just go along with what's just been said. When you look at the road, it doesn't look incredibly busy, and that actually looks quite straight to me, and there's lots of other accesses coming on. I should imagine the first access was probably better, but I think it's all quite marginal. And it's a very quiet area. I thought it was really not worth consideration, but that's just my opinion.
Thank you, Chairman. Could I just ask the officers to show us the extent fallback plan at the moment and compare it to, yes, the one before that, where the access was shared. So that is, I mean, it occurred to me as soon as I saw the next diagram that the access, the new access that is being proposed today, does come straight out onto the road, and it's very close to a junction. I can't make up my mind about this, to be honest with you. If it's a quiet road, then I don't think it matters that much, but I do appreciate the danger that could be imposed upon that roadway if it's very close to a junction. It looks to me like it's going to be a bit of a blind spot, whereas the original one does come out onto a straighter part of the road. So it's difficult to judge. I'm not really quite sure whether I should support Councillor Circus or not on this one. Could you just go back to the, sorry, Councillor Circus. The access does look a lot easier on the original one.
Councillor Lambert.
I fully support the officers and their recommendations. It's a very quiet road, one access just there where there's 13 houses. I think we don't need.
Councillor Redwood.
I was going to say, could we actually see where the old one is and where the new one is? Yeah, that's the old. I can't, that's gone off.
Help members to look at page 51 of the documents and show the layout of roundabout Cops and various houses.
Okay, Councillor Lloyd, please.
Yes, I'm just wondering, following off what Councillor Circus said, whether we could also put a condition in about visibility displays.
Yes, we can, and that may address some concerns regarding the safety of the access, because we can ensure that it meets the required visibility displays as per county highway standards. Thank you.
Any other speakers? No other speakers. Councillor Circus wants to put in a deferment proposal, but he would need a seconder for that. Is there a seconder? Councillor Null. Yes.
Can I just clarify? I think Councillor Circus's motion was to delegate approval subject to the further consideration of the access rather than a deferral.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's simply to delegate.
Okay.
Agreed, but just to satisfy ourselves on the question of access, which could be that we decide in the end that it can be, that we can live with the new access arrangements subject to the question of visibility.
Would you like to put your proposal in words now?
Right, that we will, that this is delegated with a view to approval for discussions between officers and ward members on the best way to address issues of access to the new property. Does that sound about right? Yep.
I think, yeah, so I think Councillor Circus is to consider the access further in consultation with officers, and I'd suggest County Highways is the highway authority.
Is there a seconder? Councillor Knowles seconded it. We go to this vote now. Democratic Service, we're going to the vote now. You ready? All those in favour of Councillor Circus's proposal? All those against? Thank you. Proposal carried. We now go on to agenda item 8. And would Mr. Longhurst? Oh, is Mr. Longhurst not here? That's okay. Yes, we'll just take a few minutes, wait to see whether the speakers are on. Yes, yeah. Yeah. When you're just
we're hoping, well, actually we're not, we're hoping to go the 1st of September. But not if they still want posting.
Yes. Joe, is there no speaker? Can you please get seated again? Thank you very much. We now go on to agenda item 8, which is erection of 2-story dwelling Brookside Farm, Dagbroek Lane, Enfield. Would the officers please lead?
Thank you. So this is an application as departure, hence its inclusion in the report. There's no additional reps. There is an error on page 58, sorry, paragraph 6.11. This refers to DC 20-0817 as permission for 4 dwellings. Actually, this is for the conversion to 1 dwelling, so that's an error. However, it doesn't make any difference to the recommendation and still considered a viable fallback position. So sorry about that. So here we see the location plan. Site comprises a barn adjacent to a collection of buildings, including dwellings in a countryside location to the south of Enfield. And you can see the access of the site outlined in red with an access from the north. You can see an aerial view. You can see the barn there in red, fronting a field north of some dwelling. And here is a photo of the existing barn, which is subject to previous prior approvals. So the proposal is for the demolition of the existing barn, construction of a 2-story dwelling house. So here we see the proposed block plan, showing the position of the new house with the garden, curtilage, parking area, access from the north. This shows the proposed floor plan. This is a large 5-bedroom dwelling. So, as outlined in the reports, this application is a departure from the local plan for a new house in the countryside and put forward on the basis that this site benefits from a previous permission to convert the barn to a dwelling under a prior approval. This permission is considered a viable fallback, is given weight in the recommendation for approval of the scheme, And this slide shows the previous permission for the conversion to the barn under the prior approval. So if you compare that now to the current proposal, and here we see the elevations of the current proposal for the demolition of the barn and construction of a dwelling. This shows the proposed elevations, so you can see the proposal has retained the barn conversion appearance, which is considered appropriate for this location. Overall, taking the fallback permission into consideration, the scheme is considered appropriate and would not result in a detrimental impact on residential community as outlined in the report, and is also appropriate in terms of any other material planning considerations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I haven't seen Councillor Potts arrive yet. He's probably stuck in the farm somewhere again. Right. There are no members of the public. I can see. There are no public speakers. There should have been one, but they haven't attended. And the Democrat Service Officer has had a good look for the party. Therefore, we'll call on Ward Member Councillor Morgan.
Thank you, Chairman. I did have an email shortly before the meeting from Councillor Potts to say he had given his apologies, but I'm not sure to who.
Okay. If his apologies can be recorded, thank you very much.
I mean, this is another one of these barn conversions that causes me concern. I believe that the original intention of the legislation was to allow redundant barns to be converted into residential dwellings under the Class Q prior approval permissions. What we're seeing is that because conversions are not so visually appealing or do not attract the same sale values as the demolition of barns and brand new buildings being constructed in the countryside, which would not normally be permitted. However, we are where we are, and I probably know that the answer to this, but can the officers please confirm that this present application, if approved, would supersede the Class Q and no further development would take place on this site? Could I also ask the officers to bring up the elevations for the previous refusal again and for this application? I just wanted to see what the actual differences were.
So this is the previous refusal for a dwelling house. So this was a refusal on the basis that it was too dissimilar to the conversion. So it didn't have it has more of a traditional design. It's not considered, because this is quite a prominent position. So this was a large more traditional dwelling, and it would, so that was considered inappropriate, and it was considered too much of a departure from the previous prior approval.
Just to answer your other question, Councillor Morgan, is obviously the prior approval only allowed one house for this particular one. Clearly, we can't predict the future in terms of what else may happen on the site, but the prior approval for this only allowed the conversion of one building to one dwelling. So that's the principle that's been allowed in terms of this application.
Actually, I mean, the report did throw me a bit when it talked about 4 houses there, or 4 dwellings. So no, that did concern me. Yeah, I don't like it, but I don't think we have any alternative but to approve this matter. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers from the floor? Councillor Noel.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to make a comment that, well, I'm no fan of Class Q developments, and I think that if they are going to happen, they have to adhere to, as outlined on page 57, 6.8, paragraph 8 of the MPPF, which says that the design really has to be of exceptional quality and truly outstanding or innovative. I don't think that black stained weatherboarding and brick plinths are particularly outstanding or innovative. I have to say that it probably is a little bit better than the previous one, but it's in no way is it outstanding. This is a building, a rural building set out in the countryside, away from anywhere else, and it really has to be an exceptional building. And this is patently not an exceptional design or of quality. So I may be barking up the wrong tree here, but I think it's enough to object to it, but perhaps the officers can put me right.
Unfortunately, Class Q do not have to adhere to the MPPF because it's permitted development. So the principle has already been allowed under permitted development, which it does not involve the MPPF in any way. We can't consider the MPPF when we consider a class Q. And paragraph 80 of the MPPF is where you would allow a new dwelling where there's no precedent or principle already set. So because a class Q has been granted under permitted development, not under planning policy, you have to therefore consider that as a material consideration. So that is the weight that you pay to it, in a sense. If there was nothing there and they weren't converting a barn and they were proposing a new dwelling, then that's when you would add more weight to the exceptional design. I don't disagree with your comments, Councillor Noel, and I have a similar view, but that's in terms of how we have to consider the class Q applications. Thank you.
In that case, I'll begrudgingly support it. Thank you.
Councillor Chair.
As you're doing so well on time, can I ask a question? This is a bit of a teaching on this very issue, because when you look at that original barn, it was still a very useful building, because all it was an open area, very high, so good for storage and can do anything in it with a roof on it. And I would have thought very useful for any farmer going forward. I think when people were thinking of barn conversions, I think we know what they were thinking about barn conversion. It immediately appears in your eye. That doesn't look like a barn which you would convert. It just looks like an industrial building that we can, by the look of it, turn into a house, which means that actually I keep thinking, well, if I go home and find a bit of land, and I say I need to put a barn on it, I put a cheap old barn on like that with a few struts going up. How long have I got to wait? This is for the planning officer, for me to convert that into a, are we recording this? I suppose we are. Before I can put, because when I come forward in 5 years' time, you'll say, declare an interest. But how long would it be? Do I have to say, well, actually, I'm not
Honestly,
using it
Councillor
now.
Sharon, I cannot remember, but you can't just put them up and then convert it. There does have to be a period of time. I don't know if Louise can remember. I think it's like something around 10 years, but I can't recall the exact date. But there's a date in legislation where it has to have been in existence as an agricultural building for it to then qualify to be considered under the class Q. So it is a waiting game.
Oh, well, I just want to know if it's 10 years, because I better get on with it. If it's 10 years. If it's shorter than that, I've got time to think about it. That does seem interesting, though, doesn't it?
The
That
legal
was a
officer's having a quick look. I think 10 years rings a bell. Oh, it rang a bell.
Now that really complicates the issue if it's a second hand. Thank you very much. Sorry, Chairman. We're not asking a friend, are we? I didn't think it was that complicated.
Well, I think we can go. There's no more speakers as I see it. I think we'll go to the vote now, and legal officers having a moment. Democratic Service, you ready for the vote? All those in favour of the application to approve planning permission subject to appropriate conditions, please show. Thank you. Anybody against? Any abstentions? No. Oh, one abstention. Councillor Crowe at the back. Right, the motion is carried. Do you have anything on that query? Still, okay. We go on to item 6, urgent business. There's none.